On the 7th of May, 1763, in the elegant Palais Kinski of Vienna, a child was born into privilege and expectation. His name, Józef Antoni Poniatowski. The city into which he entered was the glittering capital of the Habsburg Empire, but the legacy that would shape him was far older, far deeper. For, though born in Austria, Józef was destined to embody the restless, often tragic soul of Poland. Józef's father, Andrzej Poniatowski, had carved out a brilliant military career in Austrian service. Rising to the rank of Field Marshal, he was a figure of martial honor at the Habsburg court. His mother, Countess Maria Theresa Kinski, came from one of Austria's most powerful noble families, close to the court of Empress Maria Theresa. From the beginning, young Józef's bloodline bound him to two worlds: the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where his uncle Stanislaw August Poniatowski reigned as king, and the Austrian Empire, the very heart of Central European power. To be a child of two empires is to be torn between loyalties. And this tension would define Józef's life. Raised in Vienna, he received an aristocratic education. Tutors schooled him in French, German, Polish, and Russian. He was taught mathematics, music, horsemanship, and the elegant diplomacy of court life. He learned to fence with precision and to ride with grace, his instructors noting his natural poise and charisma. Even as a boy, he seemed set apart. His companions often remarked on his seriousness of mind, how he studied maps for hours, tracing rivers and fortresses with a finger, as if imagining future campaigns. And yet, he was no recluse. Józef loved music, dancing, and the fashionable society of Vienna. But beneath the polished veneer, there burned something stronger, a sense of destiny. Tragedy struck early. Józef's father died in 1773, when Józef was only 10 years old. With Andrzej gone, guardianship of the boy passed to his uncle, King Stanislaw August, the last monarch of Poland. The king saw in his nephew not merely a relative, but a potential defender of Poland's fragile sovereignty. Poland in the 18th century was a kingdom under siege, partitioned by its neighbors, manipulated by foreign powers, and struggling for survival. The young prince, though raised in Vienna, was constantly reminded of this looming tragedy. Letters from Warsaw spoke of Russia's encroachment, Prussia's schemes, Austria's ambitions. For Józef, patriotism was not an abstract virtue. It was a duty woven into his very blood. In 1780, at the age of 17, Józef entered Austrian military service as a second lieutenant in the infantry. His uncle the king had hoped he might one day serve Poland, but for now, Austria provided training, prestige, and experience. The Habsburg army was one of Europe's most formidable forces, disciplined and vast. Within its ranks, Józef quickly distinguished himself. His bearing, courage, and tactical instincts marked him as a man destined for command. By the late 1780s, he had risen to the rank of colonel. He became aide-de-camp to Emperor Joseph II himself, an extraordinary honor for a foreign-born officer. In 1788, war erupted between Austria and the Ottoman Empire. Joseph marched to the front. Here, on the Balkan battlefields, he faced the brutal realities of combat. At the Battle of Shabak, Joseph's courage shone. Eyewitnesses describe him leading a charge, saber raised high, urging his men into the fray. Amid the chaos of musket fire and cannon smoke, he was wounded, carried from the field bloodied, but unbroken. One Austrian officer later wrote, "The young Prince Poniatowski showed a spirit that belied his years. Struck down in the advance, he rose again, unwilling to yield. Such valor, we believed, would not long go unnoticed." The emperor himself commended Joseph for his gallantry. At just 25, he had already carved his name into the annals of Austrian service. And yet, despite honors in Vienna, Joseph's heart was not Austrian. In 1789, at the urging of his uncle the king, he resigned his commission. Poland needed him. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was undertaking bold reforms, crafting the Constitution of May 3, 1791, Europe's first modern constitution after that of the United States. But Russia, Prussia, and Austria all viewed these reforms with suspicion, even hostility. The Commonwealth required defenders, and who better than a Poniatowski prince, battle-tested and loyal? Joseph returned to Warsaw, greeted with acclaim. He entered Polish service as a major general, taking command of the Royal Guards. The young aristocrat of Vienna was now the champion of a threatened kingdom. But even as Joseph embraced his new command, storm clouds gathered. In 1792, Russia invaded Poland to suppress the constitutional reforms. Joseph would now face his greatest test. The prince who had grown up between Vienna's palaces and Warsaw's salons would soon march at the head of Polish troops into desperate battle. His early life, the languages learned, the skills honed, the wounds endured, had prepared him for this moment. From the polished courts of Vienna to the embattled plains of Poland, Józef Poniatowski was now ready to write his name into history. His early life had given him honor, education, and the soldier's spirit. But the chapters to come, war, loyalty, and sacrifice, would make him a legend. By the early 1790s, Europe stood at a crossroads. Revolutions rumbled in France, monarchies trembled, and in the East, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth struggled for survival. Into this storm rode Prince Józef Poniatowski, no longer the polished officer of Vienna, but the chosen defender of a nation in peril. In 1792, Russia invaded Poland. The reason? The adoption of the Constitution of May 3, 1791, a bold charter of liberty and reform. To Catherine the Great of Russia, this experiment in freedom threatened her grip on Polish affairs. She sent in her armies to crush it. At the head of Polish resistance stood Prince Józef Poniatowski, commanding the Royal Guards and a force of hastily gathered troops. A Polish officer later recalled, "The prince was everywhere, his cloak flying, his sword gleaming. Where the line wavered, there he was. When the cannon roared, it was his voice that carried above the thunder. Stand firm for Poland." On June 18, 1792, near the village of Zilance, Poniatowski led Polish forces into a pitched battle against superior Russian troops. For hours the struggle raged, volleys of musket fire tearing through the summer air. Though outnumbered, Poniatowski's leadership turned the tide, rallying his men. He launched a counterattack that drove the Russians back. The victory electrified the nation. For the first time in years, Poles had beaten their powerful eastern neighbor in open battle. In honor of this triumph, King Stanislaw August established a new order of merit. The Virtuti Militari Poland's highest military decoration. The first recipient, Prince Józef Poniatowski. A Polish soldier later wrote, "We believed him invincible. When the smoke cleared and the Russians fled, we knew we had witnessed not only a battle won, but a leader revealed." Yet victory proved hollow. In July 1792, King Stanislaw, under pressure, acceded to the pro-Russian Targowica Confederation, betraying the reformers. For Poniatowski, the king's submission was unbearable. Rather than serve a regime of treachery, he resigned his commission and withdrew from Warsaw. He would not raise his sword in the service of capitulation. But the fight was not over. In 1794, under the leadership of Tadeusz Kosciuszko, Poland rose again. Cities flared with rebellion, and Józef Poniatowski returned to the field, commanding forces in the defense of Warsaw. During the desperate summer sieges, he fought with unmatched courage. Wounded, exhausted, but unyielding, he became a symbol of resistance. Yet the uprising was crushed, Poland was partitioned once more, and Józef was forced into exile. For over a decade. Poniatowski lived in relative obscurity, first in Vienna and later on his estates. He refused offers to serve foreign powers, keeping faith with the idea of a reborn Poland. Then, in 1807, the drums of destiny sounded again. Napoleon Bonaparte, master of Europe, had shattered Prussia and carved from its ruins a new state, the Duchy of Warsaw. Napoleon needed a Polish leader of honor and prestige. There could be only one choice: Józef Poniatowski. In 1809, Austria launched an invasion of the Duchy of Warsaw, hoping to crush this fragile Polish revival. With just 16,000 men, Poniatowski faced an Austrian force nearly double in size. A decisive battle came at Racine, outside Warsaw. A veteran of Racine later remembered, "The Austrians came on with thunder, their cannon tearing gaps in our line. Yet the prince rode calmly, his horse rearing as he called to us, 'Oh, sons of Poland, this ground is ours, or it is our grave.'" Against all odds, Poniatowski held the field. Though technically a stalemate, Racine was a strategic triumph. The Austrians retreated, and Poniatowski launched a daring counteroffensive. His troops swept through Galicia, reclaiming lost lands and igniting Polish hopes. As Napoleon's ally, Poniatowski and his army joined the emperor's campaigns. Polish troops fought in Spain, in Germany, and across Europe. But their greatest trial came in 1812, during Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Here's what Poniatowski described as his motivation for invading Russia. "If I must march to Moscow to win a homeland for Poland, then march I shall. Let the world say I chose France, but I chose Poland first." Commanding the 5th Corps of the Grande Armée, Poniatowski led tens of thousands of Poles into the vast Russian steppes. Their goal: to march with Napoleon to Moscow and secure Poland's independence in return. At Borodino, one of the bloodiest battles of the age, Poniatowski's corps bore the brunt of the fighting. Waves of cannon fire and musketry cut down his ranks. Yet he refused to yield. Here's an eyewitness account from French officer of Poniatowski at Borodino. The Poles fought like lions, urged on by their prince. He was wounded, yet remained in the saddle. His devotion inspired even the French. We called him the Knight of Honor. The campaign was a disaster. Frost, famine, and fire consumed the Grande Armée. Yet Poniatowski's loyalty endured. He refused to abandon Napoleon, even when hope seemed lost. A French officer later recalled in his memoirs, amid the ruin of Moscow and the endless snow, the Poles clung to their prince. Others cursed the emperor. Poniatowski never did. His silence was loyalty, his endurance, devotion. When Napoleon made it back Moscow, only a fraction of Poniatowski's corps remained. Still, the prince fought on through the horrors of the retreat, his army shattered but his loyalty unbroken. After the catastrophe in Russia, Europe rose against Napoleon. In 1813, Poniatowski rallied the remnants of the Polish army, forming the 8th Corps some 22,000 men strong. The story was not yet complete. Ahead lay loyalty tested beyond all measure, and a final act written in blood and water at Leipzig. The world knew him as a soldier of valor, courage, sacrifice, defiance, and skill. But Józef Poniatowski was more than a general. He was the symbol of Poland's survival, a nation carved apart by its neighbors, yet refusing to die. And in that struggle, he chose an unlikely ally, Napoleon Bonaparte. Why Napoleon? For the Poles, the answer was simple. France had the strength to shake Europe. If Napoleon triumphed, perhaps Poland might rise again from the ashes of partition. Poniatowski saw this clearly. He was no naive courtier. He knew the emperor's promises could be fickle. Yet he believed the alliance offered Poland its best, perhaps its only chance. Back in Warsaw, he worked tirelessly to hold the duchy together. Supplies dwindled, morale faltered, and yet Poniatowski pressed on. He issued decrees, rebuilt regiments, and kept the flame of independence alive. Poland's very existence as a semi-state hung on Napoleon's fortunes. Poniatowski knew this, and still he would not turn away. To him, honor demanded loyalty, no matter the outcome. He rebuilt his army, now the 8th Corps, numbering some 22,000 men. In battle after battle, Lörrau, Zedlitz, Dresden, the Poles fought with ferocity, holding back overwhelming odds. At Dresden, his corps stood firm on Napoleon's flank, absorbing wave after wave of Austrian attacks. His devotion impressed even hardened French marshals. A French officer later wrote of Poniatowski, "We spoke of him as one of us, though he was not French. His men adored him. To the emperor he was the most faithful of allies. If any man among us deserved the baton of Opana, Marshal, it was he." In October 1813, as the French and their allies gathered for the decisive showdown at Leipzig, Napoleon made a fateful decision. On October 15th, he elevated Józef Poniatowski to the rank of Marshal of the Empire. It was an unprecedented honor. Poniatowski became the only foreigner ever raised to this dignity. For him, it was not personal glory. It was recognition that Poland's sacrifice had not gone unnoticed. The timing was dramatic, almost prophetic. Just days later, the Battle of the Nations would engulf Leipzig in fire and blood. Why did he stay loyal? Many ask this even today. Napoleon's star was fading. Austria, his mother's homeland, urged him to defect. Prussia dangled offers of position. Even Russia promised safety if he abandoned the French cause. Poniatowski refused them all. To him, loyalty was not a calculation of power, but a matter of honor. He had chosen Napoleon because Napoleon had given Poland a chance, however slim, at rebirth. To abandon him now would be to abandon that hope, and betray his men who had died under the French banner. Polish historian Jerzy Skowronek observed, he approached his final hours not in despair, but with dignity. As a man who had chosen the best possible attitude, he had given his word, and he would keep it, even unto death. In October of 1813, the world closed in on Napoleon. Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Sweden stood united against him. The fields around Leipzig would decide the fate of Europe. And in the midst of this colossal struggle rode Prince Józef Poniatowski, now Marshal of the French Empire and commander of the Polish Corps. For 3 days, the fighting raged. Cavalry charges thundered across muddy fields. Artillery roared. Villages changed hands again and again. Poniatowski's men, worn and battered, fought with extraordinary valor. On Napoleon's right flank, they held against overwhelming Russian and Austrian attacks. The prince himself, though already wounded, refused to leave the field. There's an eyewitness account from a French officer of Poniatowski at Leipzig. He was struck once, then again, his uniform stained with blood. Yet he rode on, his horse lathered, his sword bright in the smoke. I thought to myself, this man is no ordinary general. He is the very spirit of Poland made flesh. On October the 15th, Napoleon had made him Marshal. Just 3 days later, on October 18th, the French line began to buckle. Surrounded and outnumbered, the Emperor ordered a retreat toward the city of Leipzig. Napoleon turned to Poniatowski with a terrible request. You, Marshal, will cover the retreat. It was an order that meant near certain death. But Poniatowski did not hesitate. He screamed out, I will obey. For France, for Poland, I will hold the line. For hours, Poniatowski and his Poles fought street by street, house by house, holding back the coalition armies as the French retreated. Smoke choked the narrow lanes of Leipzig. Civilians cowered in their homes as musket balls whined through the air. Poniatowski had been wounded twice more, a lance thrust in the side, a musket ball in the arm. Barely able to stay in the saddle, he still directed his troops, shouting commands with a voice hoarse from smoke and blood. A Polish soldier later wrote in his memoir, the Marshal's face was pale, but his eyes burned. We begged him to withdraw. He shook his head. Not while my men fight. We knew then he had chosen his fate. As evening fell on the 19th of October, disaster struck. The French engineers, misinformed, blew up the bridge across the White Elster River too soon, while thousands of soldiers, including Poniatowski, were still on the wrong side. Trapped, surrounded by Russians and Prussians, Poniatowski faced the end. His body was racked with pain from multiple wounds. Yet he refused to surrender. With no path left, he turned his horse toward the river. Here's an eyewitness account from a French grenadier. I saw him pause on the bank. For a moment, he looked back toward the smoke of Leipzig. Then, spurring his horse, he plunged into the Elster. A volley rang out, and the water closed over him. Shot, bleeding, weighed down by his uniform and decorations, Poniatowski disappeared beneath the dark waters of the Elster. His horse thrashed, his plume vanished beneath the current. For days, soldiers searched. Finally, on October 24th, his body was found downstream, battered and lifeless. The last Marshal of Napoleon, the first and only foreigner to hold the title, was gone. He was just 50 years old. Napoleon wept when he learned of Poniatowski's death. To his soldiers, it was as if chivalry itself had drowned in the Elster. His body was returned to Poland, where it was laid to rest in Wool Cathedral in Krakow, among kings, poets, and national heroes. His name joined the roll of legends. A French officer later paid tribute to Poniatowski in his memoir, "He was more than a marshal. He was honor itself, and he died as he lived faithful, unyielding, and true to his word." For Poles, Poniatowski's death became more than a personal tragedy. It was a symbol. In him, they saw the fate of their country brave, loyal, wounded again and again, yet refusing surrender until the final breath. Statues would rise. Painters like Horace Vernet would immortalize his last ride into the river. His name would be carved on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris and remembered in Warsaw's streets and Krakow's tombs. Even in death, Józef Poniatowski remained the embodiment of the Polish spirit, gallant, tragic, and immortal. On that October evening in Leipzig, Prince Józef Poniatowski chose not surrender, but sacrifice. His life ended in the cold waters of the Elster, but his honor endures. He was the Knight of Poland, Napoleon's marshal, and a hero whose death gave his nation hope in the darkest of times.